In the early hours of June 22, 2025, something happened over the skies of the Middle East that had not occurred in the modern geopolitical era. The United States Air Force dispatched multiple B-52H Stratofortress strategic bombers on a combat strike mission against hardened underground nuclear facilities inside the Islamic Republic of Iran. This was not a show of force. This was not a flyby. This was a deliberate, coordinated, and meticulously planned military operation targeting the very foundations of Iran's nuclear program. And what followed in the hours, days, and weeks after would reshape the strategic landscape of the Middle East, test the cohesion of American alliances, and send shockwaves through every major capital on the planet. To understand what happened and why it mattered, we have to go back further than the strike itself. The United States had, for years, relied on a combination of diplomatic pressure, economic sanctions, and covert action to slow Iran's nuclear ambitions. The 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, had been the diplomatic centerpiece of that effort. But by 2025, that framework had long since collapsed. Iran had enriched uranium to levels approaching weapons grade, operated advanced centrifuge cascades at Fordo and Natanz, and according to multiple intelligence assessments from the IAEA, the CIA, and Mossad, was within weeks of having enough fissile material for its first nuclear device. The window for non-military options had effectively closed. President Donald Trump, returned to office after the 2024 election, had made clear from the outset that a nuclear-armed Iran was an unacceptable outcome. Diplomatic back channels through Oman had stalled. Sanctions had been tightened to their theoretical maximum. And then on June 21, 2025, following the collapse of a final round of negotiations in Vienna and the detection of what American intelligence described as accelerated weaponization activity at the Parchin military complex southeast of Tehran, the president authorized the use of military force. The operational architecture of the strike was a product of years of planning, and at its core sat an asset that only the United States possesses in meaningful numbers. The B-52H Stratofortress, equipped with the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, commonly known as the MOP. The MOP is the largest non-nuclear bomb in the American arsenal, a 30,000-pound bunker-busting munition designed specifically to defeat deeply buried, hardened underground facilities. At the time of the strike, only the B-2 Spirit and the B-52H had been certified to deliver it. The decision to use B-52s rather than B-2s was in part a statement of intent. The B-52, while less stealthy than the B-2, has a larger payload capacity and was considered adequate given the air defense suppression campaign that preceded the strike. That suppression campaign began roughly 72 hours before the first MOP hit Iranian soil. U.S. Navy electronic warfare aircraft, EA-18G Growlers operating from the USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group in the northern Arabian Sea, began systematically jamming Iranian radar networks. Simultaneously, the U.S. Air Force deployed AGM-88 HARM anti-radiation missiles, launched from F-16CJs and F-35As operating from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, targeting the integrated air defense nodes that form the backbone of Iran's S-300 and Bavar 373 surface-to-air missile networks. Iran's air defenses, while formidable on paper, were layered and overlapping rather than redundant, and the methodical destruction of radar emitters began degrading their coherence hours before the B-52s arrived on station. The B-52Hs themselves flew from Diego Garcia, the British Indian Ocean Territory base that has served as the launch point for American power projection into the region for decades. The aircraft flew in two ship formations, each carrying up to two GBU-57 MOPs. Their routes were carefully deconflicted with Israeli airspace and coordinated through a classified air tasking order shared with key regional partners, including Saudi Arabia, which had quietly granted overflight permission in a development that underscored the extent to which Arab-Israeli-American security convergence had progressed in the post-Abraham Accords environment. The primary targets were Fordo, the enrichment facility built deep into a mountain near Qom. the Natanz fuel enrichment plant and its underground halls, and the Parchin military research complex. Secondary targets included the Iraq Heavy Water Reactor Facility and several missile production sites associated with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' aerospace force. The strikes did not target Tehran's civilian infrastructure, government buildings, or military leadership compounds, a deliberate constraint designed to signal the limited surgical nature of the operation and preserve diplomatic off-ramps. The results were significant, though not uniformly successful. Fordow, which sits under approximately 80 meters of rock and reinforced concrete, sustained severe structural damage from multiple MOP impacts. Post-strike imagery analyzed by the Institute for Science and International Security and the Middlebury Institute confirmed surface crater patterns consistent with deep penetration detonations and the collapse of access tunnels. Natanz suffered damage to its advanced centrifuge halls, with analysts estimating a setback of 1 to 2 years to Iran's enrichment capacity. Parchin was struck by a combination of MOPs and joint direct attack munitions, destroying several above-ground structures associated with high explosive testing relevant to nuclear warhead development. But the strike was not a clean success in every dimension. Iran's Fordow facility had been constructed with precisely this scenario in mind, and some analysts believe the deepest centrifuge chambers may have survived. More immediately consequential, within hours of the first impacts, Iran's response machinery activated, and it did so across multiple domains simultaneously. The Iranian response began in cyberspace. Within 12 hours of the strike, American, Israeli, and Saudi critical infrastructure networks came under sustained cyber attack attributed to APT-33 and APT-34, Iranian state-sponsored hacking groups linked to the IRGC intelligence organization. Several American natural gas pipeline control systems were disrupted. The Israeli national electrical grid experienced targeted intrusions. In Saudi Arabia, attacks consistent with the Shamoon destructive malware variant were detected in the petrochemical sector. None of these attacks achieved catastrophic effects, partly because U.S. Cyber Command had pre-positioned defensive assets and conducted what officials described as preparatory offensive operations to blunt Iranian cyber capacity, but they demonstrated Iran's intent to impose costs across every available vector. On the ground, Iran activated its network of proxy forces. Within 48 hours, Hezbollah in Lebanon launched a barrage of Fateh 110 ballistic missiles and Kornet anti-tank guided missiles against northern Israeli communities and IDF forward positions. Hamas remnants in Gaza, though severely degraded after the 2023-2024 conflict, conducted small-scale rocket attacks. Houthi forces in Yemen resumed maritime attacks in the Red Sea, targeting commercial shipping and, for the first time, a U.S. Navy destroyer with an anti-ship ballistic missile, a weapon Iran had transferred to the Houthis in violation of UN arms embargo resolutions. The destroyer USS Cole, grimly echoing the 2000 attack of the same name, was struck and damaged but not sunk, with casualties reported. In the Strait of Hormuz, the IRGC Navy deployed swarms of fast attack craft, backed by shore-based anti-ship missile batteries, in a show of force designed to signal Iran's capacity to threaten global oil flows. For approximately 72 hours, commercial shipping through the strait ground to a halt, sending oil prices above $120 per barrel and triggering emergency releases from strategic petroleum reserves in the United States, Europe, and Japan. The U.S. Fifth Fleet, reinforced by the arrival of the USS Nimitz Carrier Strike Group, conducted what it described as freedom of navigation operations through the strait under heavy air cover, ultimately forcing Iranian naval assets to withdraw from their most aggressive forward postures. Iran also launched a direct ballistic and cruise missile strike against U.S. facilities in the region, targeting Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar and Ain al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, mirroring its January 2020 response to the killing of Qasem Soleimani, but with more missiles and with improved precision. Patriot PAC-3 and THAAD batteries intercepted the majority of incoming threats, but several ballistic missiles penetrated and impacted within the base perimeter at Al Udeid, killing 3 American service members and wounding dozens. It was the first direct Iranian ballistic missile attack resulting in American fatalities, a threshold crossing that dramatically raised the stakes of the confrontation. The international community responded with predictable fracture. Israel expressed support for the American strikes. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain remained conspicuously silent publicly while maintaining operational coordination privately. NATO issued a statement expressing support for American security concerns regarding Iranian nuclear proliferation while calling for restraint and a diplomatic resolution. France and Germany expressed discomfort with the unilateral nature of the action, while the United Kingdom offered qualified support. Russia condemned the strikes as a violation of international law and convened an emergency session of the UN Security Council, where its veto, alongside China's, blocked any resolution endorsing the American action. The strategic implications of what occurred in those weeks extend far beyond the immediate military balance in the Middle East. For nuclear non-proliferation, the strikes established or re-established, depending on one's reading of history, a precedent that the United States is willing to use military force to prevent a hostile state from acquiring nuclear weapons. This sent simultaneous messages to Pyongyang, to Beijing regarding Taiwan's security concerns, and to every other state that might consider a nuclear hedge, American red lines, when they involve direct threats to American security architecture, carry kinetic consequences. For the broader Middle East, the strikes accelerated a realignment already underway. The Abraham Accords framework, though informal on security matters, demonstrated real-world operational coherence. Saudi Arabia's quiet facilitation of the operation and its willingness to absorb Iranian proxy escalation without breaking from the American security umbrella reflected a calculated judgment that a nuclear-armed Iran posed a greater existential risk than the regional instability triggered by the strikes. The Gulf states understood that the alternative, an Iran crossing the nuclear threshold, would have triggered an immediate proliferation cascade, with Saudi Arabia and potentially Turkey and Egypt pursuing their own nuclear programs within years. For NATO and European security, the strikes created uncomfortable questions about allied consultation and burden sharing. European allies who had invested years in diplomatic outreach to Tehran found their frameworks invalidated overnight. The episode exposed a fundamental tension within the Western alliance between American willingness to exercise unilateral military power in defense of its strategic interests and the European preference for multilateral rules-based approaches. That tension will not resolve easily, and it will shape debates over NATO's geographic scope and the alliance's relationship with American military leadership for years to come. What this episode ultimately illustrates is the enduring relevance of credible military capability as the foundation of strategic deterrence. Diplomacy operated in the shadow of the B-52, and when diplomacy failed, the aircraft flew. The strikes did not end the Iranian nuclear program permanently. No military action short of regime change could guarantee that outcome, but they imposed a significant setback, demonstrated American resolve, and altered the cost-benefit calculus for every actor in the region, watching to see whether the world's preeminent military power would, when the moment arrived, choose action over accommodation. The answer, delivered by 8 engines and 30,000 pounds of precision-guided ordnance, was unambiguous. The consequences of that answer, however, are still being written. In damaged reactors and missile craters and diplomatic cables, and in the accelerated calculations of every state that now knows with renewed certainty that American strategic bombers do not only fly in exercises,